morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, viewer. Just setting up for tonight's club game of Lasalle 2. You'll have already seen pictures, hopefully, at the start of the video of the setup. Just thought I'd go through a few things that we've found perhaps a little puzzling, a little confusing, and a couple of items that perhaps traditional gamers may balk at with these rules. They are a very good, fun set of rules, but there are, as with all rules, a few particular occasions that you may raise an eyebrow or two and say, really? The pieces of green sponge attached to a little piece of wood there in the middle, they are meant to represent, for tonight's game, 3 sections of earthworks. Unfortunately, as yet, I don't actually possess any specific items for earthworks. And there's a little bit of confusion in our minds as to what effect they have and how they're to be placed. More of that in just a minute. So let's just have a look at a few items that may raise a few eyebrows. One of the first things that we noticed that perhaps raised the ire of some traditional gamers more than anything else was that when a unit is in effect destroyed, i.e. routed, either in combat due to firing, the routing unit has no effect whatsoever on any other units around it. Most sets of rules that I've come across over the years, when a unit, regardless of the scale, whether you're talking battalion, brigade, even division, when a particular unit is destroyed, routes off the table, etc., other units around it usually have to take some sort of morale test, which may result in them dropping their weapons and running as well, or even perhaps suffering a damage point or a morale loss of something of such effect. Likewise, I have seen some rules where if the brigade commander or the commanders per se are injured or incapacitated, there's some sort of morale test for the units under his command. In these rules, no such animal. Say, for example, if this unit here was forced to rout due to either combat or fire, no other Spanish unit around it, that even if it passes directly back through, has to take any sort of check. You just carry on regardless. A little unusual. Sam Mustafa does give a brief explanation. One of the good things about Mustafa's rules is you may disagree with his conclusion, but he certainly puts out there why he has designed something the way it is. Okay, so that's the first point of query contention. Another perhaps unusual feature of Sam's rules is that Sam thinks the quantitative differences between the different troop types is overstated. For example, light troops aren't necessarily differentiated from line troops. And if, just to give you an example here, see if I can bring this in without destroying the vision. There we go. You can see that a Spanish militia Oh, actually, that's probably not such a good idea. Let's go the next one up. Spanish provincial. Now, they are poor shots, and that's what this little marker here means, and they do only provide 1 point of skirmishing. But in terms of actual strength points, there's 6, which is exactly the same as the French, is it elite unit? I can't see. Yeah, the French unit has 6. So in other words, now the French have an advantage. They can move, they don't pay what's called an extra momentum point. These little cross swords means they can charge without having to pay an extra manoeuvre point. And they do have, they provide 3 to skirmishing instead of just the 1. So there are little differences like that, but actually at the point of impact, if this French unit has got 6 strength points and it charges the infantry, the Spanish provincial infantry with 6 points, there's no modifier for the French being of, supposedly superior quality. It's 6 versus 6. Boom, done. Sam does go into some discussion about this. His opinion is that the reason that elite and grenadier and these sorts of people did better is because they were often tucked away at the back of the battle. Tucked away at the back of the battle, well fed, out of harm's way, and that they were released, if you like, upon the enemy when the enemy was worn down. He quotes a lot of research he's done, particularly with the Westphalian army, where he can't see any difference in the, I guess, proficiency, would that be the word? Any difference in effect between regular line Westphalian troops and, say, Guard Westphalian troops. And I assume he has come to the same conclusion about other armies. So there are little differences between them. Sometimes in terms of rally, say elite and guard units may rally a little bit easier, but it's just a bit unusual in, say, in a straight up bun fight. For example, 4 points of guard versus 4 points of conscript, no difference. So that's unusual. Now, as I hopefully have mentioned earlier, these pieces of green foam on wood, which actually are meant to be hedges, I'm using them as earthworks. And the Spanish list, as I believe the Russian and also the Ottoman Turk list has reference to, for the Spanish it says a Spanish army may purchase up to 6 4 base widths long sections of earthworks for 4 points each. They must be placed during setup, each within 1 base width of a Spanish infantry or artillery unit. There's not really much in the rules that actually specifies what these earthworks are meant to represent. For example, there's no reference in the rules to redoubts, fletchers, barricades. It does say that the earthwork is meant to be on the table thin, like a fence. Is an earthwork something as simple as a ditch? Is it as something as formidable as one of the fletchers at Borodino? I guess Sam has left that to the investigation of the players, arguably a bit of common sense, if you know something about Napoleonic warfare. And I've got to admit, actually, I don't know that much about redoubts, fletchers and barricades and their use. for example, the lines of Torres Vedras outside Lisbon in Portugal. Forgive me if I've pronounced that incorrectly. I have no idea what they consisted of. I've never really studied it, never had the opportunity to game it. And also it's a little bit unclear when it says up to 6 4 base width long sections. Now I assume those 4 base widths long sections all have to be together in one piece. So as you can see here, I've got one. I've actually purchased 4 for tonight's game for the Spanish. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Now in fact my sections here, each one of them is 2 base widths. So it doesn't actually say, can you join them together? For example, could you do something like that? Is that allowable? Etc., etc., etc. And then the other week we were playing this particular game. We've played it several times. I'll just pop these gentlemen back up on top of the hill. Give my hand getting in the way. Now, forgive my clumsiness here. Basically, we had a situation. Oh, there goes my arm again. Sorry. We had a situation like so. I think, in fact, one of the units was stretched out in a line, but for today's purposes, it'll give you the idea of what we were struggling with. Now, being uphill and with an earthwork, that qualifies the Spanish to have I think it's called a strong position, which gives them a +1 on the dice. The French player, who is not a Napoleonic aficionado, he comes from the world of Warhammer and fantasy, etc., etc. So when he reads something, he just goes for it. Charged with cavalry. And we said, okay. So we said, okay, +1 for a strong position. And I think it's -1 for, just bear with me, the exact terminology they use. Where are we? Difficult terrain. Now, going uphill is not difficult terrain for cavalry, but going over earthworks or a fence is. So they had a -1 for difficult terrain. These white guys had a +1 for strong position. Now, it's not +1 for the earthworks and +1 for the slope. It's just +1 for a strong position. But then the French player said, well, I also get, or you also, the Spanish should suffer -4 for poor formation. And we thought, what? We looked at the rules and it simply says that when cavalry attack infantry not in square, they suffer a -4 for poor formation. It doesn't say infantry in the open. It doesn't exclude specifically in any way that I can read anyway, infantry behind earthworks, etc., etc., etc. And we're a bit stumped there for a while because, of course, what does the earthwork represent? Is it a ditch? Is it a fully fledged redoubt? What actually does it represent? Anyway, cut a long story short, I think it's on page 79. Yeah, on page 79 of the rule book, it gives an example of cavalry attacking infantry across a fence. And it talks about the +1 for a strong defensive position, -1 for the cavalry for difficult terrain. Nowhere does it mention -4 for being in poor formation. So a combination of knowledge of Napoleonics, common sense, whatever you want to call it, we said, yeah, no, if the cavalry's attacking across a fence or earthworks, the infantry does not have to necessarily form square. I did raise this on the forum, Facebook forum, and got quite a wide response, all the way from agreeing with me that yes, it's not specifically spelt out in the rules, and perhaps it's best left to scenario designers. Quite almost violent opinions that anyone that tried that caper on their table would get, yes, would be physically assaulted. I trust they meant that in a humorous nature. But there you go. That was just something. Some things, as with all rules, some things could be house ruled or changed. So I'm sure Sam would be the first to say, go ahead, knock yourselves out. Okay, that's that. And briefly, just one last item. I may have inadvertently given the impression in my previous video of the review of Lasalle that artillery could both fire in effect twice in a turn, that they could both bombard, which is where they fire at greater range than 4 base widths, and they could also fire at 4 base widths or less with a volley order, which is basically shrapnel, I guess, close range. That wasn't my intent. No, artillery can only be given a fire order once in a turn. It can either bombard or it can volley fire. It cannot do both. I knew that when I made that particular video, but on going back over it, as I say, I'm no Cecil B. DeMille, and I just missed that I may have inadvertently given that impression in my keenness to show the mechanics of how the game worked. Okay, for tonight's game, I've made an executive decision. I've put 2 lots of 4 bases, 4 base widths. Each one of those represents 2 bases of earthworks on that particular hill, joined together, and done exactly the same here on this side of the table. So there you go. One last quick pan over the table as we get ready for tonight's game. I believe I'm going to be commanding the French. I've been commanding the Spanish in the previous games, and up on that hill like that, they are a tad difficult to remove because we're still basically in learning phase. We haven't reached a definitive conclusion. Now, those of you familiar with the system will know that I haven't put a baggage or a base. I haven't modelled such yet. Simply assume for tonight's game that at the end of either road there will be a piece there. Right, okay, so that's it for the time being. I do hope to return to do some ancients in the not too distant future. Unfortunately, life has very much got in the way the last 3 or 4 months, on top of which, I'm no great shakes with the camera or producing anything really worth watching. So there you go. Thank you, viewer, for watching, and bye for now. Hope you're all well, and hopefully see you again soon. Bye.